Chapter 1. Mary Goes to Misselthwaite. Mary Lennox was not a pretty child. Neither was she a happy one. She was often rude and bad-tempered. She lived in India with her parents, but they did not spend much time with her. Servants looked after her. She also had governesses who came from England to teach her, but they did not stay very long. They did not like Mary, and she did not like them. She was a lonely child, and was usually alone in her garden. Her mother was busy visiting friends and having friends visit her. Her father, who worked for the government, was often away. Only the servants usually knew where Mary was. One day she heard shouting and crying. Something was wrong. She did not know what, but she was afraid. She went into a hut in the garden and stayed there. Soon a pretty little snake came into the hut and stayed with her. Mary was not afraid of the snake. She knew it was not poisonous. Mary saw her mother come out of the house. She was talking to a young army officer.
"Is it really serious?"
Mary heard her mother ask the officer.
"Very. You should not be here. Why didn't you leave and go to the hills where it is safer?"
"I was silly,"
Mary's mother said.
"I wanted to go to a dinner party."
Then Mary heard shouts and cries from where the servants lived. An Indian woman ran toward her mother.
"They're dying!"
she shouted.
"They are dying!"
Mary's mother quickly went into the house. The young officer went away. Mary stayed in the hut. She was alone except for the small snake. There were shouts and cries during the day, and then everything went quiet. Toward the evening, some more officers came to the house. Mary heard one of them say,
"Everyone is dead. The dangerous sickness called cholera has killed them all."
Mary knew that cholera was a very bad disease. In some years, many people died from it. Then one of the officers opened the door of the hut. He saw Mary.
"The child isn't dead!"
he shouted.
"She's here!"
He told Mary that her parents and all the servants were dead. Mary did not say anything. She did not know what to think.
"I know I should be sad,"
she thought.
"but I'm not very sad. Maybe it's because I did not see my parents often. They were too busy to spend time with me."
For a short time, Mary went to live with a man who worked in a church and his wife. He was a clergyman named Mr. Crawford. They had a son, Basil. Mary hated him, and he hated her. Mary was not happy living with the Crawford family. Then one day Mr. Crawford said,
"Tomorrow you will leave India, Mary, and go to England. You have an uncle there, Archibald Craven. He lives at Misselthwaite Manor in the country."
Mary traveled from India to England by ship. When she arrived in London, a lady called Mrs. Medlock met her. She was Archibald Craven's housekeeper.
"What a plain child,"
Mrs. Medlock thought.
"and what an unhappy child. I don't know how she will fit in at Misselthwaite Manor."
Mary thought.
"I don't like this woman, and I'm sure she doesn't like me. I won't be happy at Misselthwaite Manor, I'm sure."
Mrs. Medlock said.
"We must take a train. Misselthwaite Manor is in Yorkshire. That's a long way from London."
When she and Mary were on the train, she said,
"Your father was Mr. Craven's brother. He is now like your parent. He is your guardian. He will look after you until you are grown up. He lives in a very large old house in the middle of a very large park. He won't spend any time with you. He's always alone. He has a bad back. He had a wife whom he loved very much, but she died. He is now a very unhappy and lonely man. He doesn't want to see or speak to anyone except Pitcher." "Who's he?"
Mary asked.
"He's a very old man who looked after Mr. Craven when he was a boy."
Mrs. Medlock told her.
"He's the only person Mr. Craven will see. Most of the rooms in the house are locked. You will be able to go into only a few of them."
Mary thought about what her life at Misselthwaite Manor was going to be like. She was going to live in a huge, old house in which most of the rooms were shut. Her guardian was an unhappy man who would not see or talk to anyone except an old servant. Then, as she looked out of the train window at the rain falling down, Mary fell asleep. She slept until the train arrived at Thwaite Station. A carriage was waiting to take her and Mrs. Medlock to Misselthwaite Manor.
It's a 5-mile journey across the moor,
Mrs. Medlock told Mary.
What's a moor?
Mary asked.
It's very wild country.
Mrs. Medlock answered.
There are no trees. Nothing much grows on it. There are a few sheep and wild ponies.
When the carriage arrived at the huge house, Mr. Pitcher, the old servant, was standing at the door waiting for them.
Shall I take the girl up to Mr. Craven?
Mrs. Medlock asked him.
No,
Pitcher said.
he doesn't want to see her tonight, and he's going to London in the morning. Take her to her room and make sure she doesn't see anything he doesn't want her to see.
Mrs. Medlock led the way up the stairs and along a long hallway. At the end of the corridor, she opened a door.
This is your room,
She said.
Stay in the room until I tell you that you can come out.
Mary went into the room. There was a fire to warm it and food on a small table. Mary was not at all pleased with her new home. Chapter 2. Mary Makes a Friend. Soon after Mary woke up the next morning, there was a knock on her bedroom door. She called out,
Come in.
and a young woman entered.
Who are you?
Mary asked her.
I'm Martha, the maid of the house.
The young woman answered.
I'm here to do your fire.
Are you my maid?
Mary asked.
Do you work for me?
No, I work for Mrs. Medlock, the housekeeper.
Where is my maid?
Mary asked.
In India, I had my own maid.
You won't have one here.
Martha said and walked to the fireplace.
Don't be rude.
Mary said angrily.
Don't you know who I am?
Yes, you're the girl from India.
Martha said.
Life isn't the same here.
But who will dress me if I haven't got a maid?
Can't you dress yourself?
Martha asked.
I never dress myself.
Mary answered.
I don't even know how to put on my shoes.
Then you'll have to learn.
Martha said.
There's no one here to do that for you.
Martha began to clean the fireplace and set a new fire. Mary went to the window and looked out. As Martha worked, she talked to Mary. At first, Mary was angry. She was not used to servants talking to her as if they were the same.
What do you think of the moor?
Martha asked her.
I don't like it. There are no trees.
Mary answered.
It has its own kind of beauty.
Martha replied.
My brother Dickon loves the moor. He spends all his spare time on it. He has his own pony. It is wild, but it comes to him when he calls it, and it lets him ride it.
I've never had a pony.
Mary said.
I've never had any kind of pet.
Martha then lit the fire and left the room. Mary began to dress herself. At first, she found it difficult, especially lacing up her shoes. Soon Martha came back. She was carrying a tray with Mary's breakfast on it.
What's that?
Mary asked rudely.
That's porridge.
Martha told her.
I'm not eating that. Throw it away.
I'm not going to throw away good food. We're always hungry at home because we never have enough money to buy food for us all. It's wrong to waste good food.
Martha was angry with Mary.
I'll eat some of the toast and marmalade and drink some tea.
Mary said.
You can do what you like with the porridge.
She sat down and began to eat some breakfast.
You should go out after your meal.
Martha said.
You shouldn't stay indoors all the time. There's nothing for you to do in the house.
Mary asked.
Will you come with me if I go out? In India, I always had a servant with me.
I'm not your servant.
Martha insisted.
I told you, I work for Mrs. Medlock, and on my day off, I go home. You must learn to do things on your own.
With these words, Martha left Mary alone. Mary finished her breakfast and left the house. She went into the huge garden. Much of it was parkland, but she soon came to a wall with a door in it. She opened the door and went inside. An old man was working in the garden.
What kind of garden is this?
Mary asked him.
There aren't any flowers.
This is the kitchen garden,
The old man said.
It's where I grow all the vegetables for the kitchen.
Mary walked to the other side of the garden to another wall. It also had a door in it. She opened the door and went into another garden. This garden was full of fruit trees. Mary could see tall trees on the other side of one of the walls of this garden. She walked toward the wall. She looked for a door. There wasn't one. She went back to the old man. He had a bird sitting on his hand, and he was talking to it.
What kind of bird is that?
Mary asked him.
It's a robin redbreast.
The old man answered.
He's my friend.
You are lucky to have a friend.
Mary said.
I've never had a friend. I'm lonely.
Are you the young girl from India?
The old man asked her.
Yes.
Mary answered.
Who are you?
I'm Ben Weatherstaff, the gardener.
The old man said. Mary asked the bird.
Will you be my friend?
The bird flew toward a tree and sat on a branch. It began to sing.
It likes you.
Ben Weatherstaff said.
Do you know a boy called Dickon?
Mary asked him next.
Everyone knows Dickon.
Ben said.
He loves the moor and spends most of his time there.
At this moment, the bird flew away from the tree, over the orchard wall and onto the branch of a tree outside the orchard.
There's another garden,
Mary said.
but I couldn't find a door to it.
There isn't a door.
Ben said.
No door? I don't believe it.
Mary exclaimed.
There used to be a door,
Ben told her.
but there hasn't been one for 10 years. No one can find a door, so don't you go looking for one. That garden is none of your business. Go away and play.
And with these words, he turned away and began digging. Chapter 3. Mary hears a strange cry. There was nothing for Mary to do in the house, so every day she walked in the gardens. She did this before breakfast, and the fresh air made her hungry. She was so hungry that she even ate the porridge and enjoyed it. After breakfast, Mary walked in the gardens and on the moor. She spent most of her time outdoors and began to feel healthier and happier than she had felt for a very long time. One day, she walked around the wall without a door. Suddenly, she heard a bird singing. She looked up, and the robin was sitting on a branch that hung over the wall. She was pleased to see the bird and talked to it.
You live in that garden, don't you?
She said.
But no one can go in because there isn't a door. I want to know what's behind this wall.
The next morning, when Martha brought her breakfast, she asked,
Martha, why isn't there a door in the wall of one of the gardens?
No one is allowed in there.
Martha answered.
Even Mr. Craven never goes in there.
But why not? What's wrong with the place?
I don't know for certain.
Martha answered.
But the story is that when Mr. Craven married, he and his young wife were very happy. They used to spend a lot of their time together in that garden, reading and talking. Then one day, a branch of a tree fell down and hit Mr. Craven's wife on the head. The next day, she died.
Oh, that is such a sad story.
Mary said. And then she thought that 4 good things had happened to her since her arrival at Misselthwaite Manor. She found a new friend, the robin. She felt really healthy. She enjoyed her food, even her porridge. And for the first time in her life, she felt sorry for someone. She felt that she was becoming a better person. As she was thinking these things, she heard a cry.
What was that?
She asked Martha. Quickly, Martha answered.
Just the wind.
No, it wasn't.
Mary said.
It did not sound like the wind, and I heard a door shut somewhere.
If it wasn't the wind,
Martha answered.
then it was Betty in the kitchen. She has a toothache.
Mary looked at Martha and thought,
She is not telling me the truth. She knows something she doesn't want me to know.
Chapter 4. Mary finds a secret garden. 2 days later, Mary was talking to Martha. She did not treat her as a servant now. She thought of her as a friend. Martha felt sorry for her. She knew how lonely she was.
I've brought you a present,
she said.
Me? A present?
Mary was very surprised.
I bought it from a man I met on my way to work.
She handed Mary a piece of rope.
What's this for?
Mary asked.
It's a skipping rope.
Martha said.
Haven't you ever skipped before?
Never.
I'll show you.
Martha showed Mary how to skip.
You're very kind.
Mary said.
And you spent some of your wages on the rope. Thank you.
Martha just smiled. She was pleased to see Mary happy.
May I visit your house?
Mary asked.
It's a 5-mile walk.
Martha said.
That's too much for you.
I want to meet your mother and Dickon. I know I shall like them.
Mary said.
I wonder what Dickon will think of you.
Martha thought out loud.
He won't like me. No one likes me.
Mary said.
Do you like yourself?
Martha asked her. Then she left the room to do her work in the house. When she was alone, Mary felt lonelier than ever. She went out of the house and ran around the garden 10 times. Ben Weatherstaff was working in it.
Spring is coming,
He said to Mary.
I can smell it in the air. Soon there will be spring flowers.
At this moment, the robin flew toward them and landed at Mary's feet.
He remembers me.
She said.
He knows everything that happens here.
Ben said.
Only he knows what's happening in the garden that has no door into it. No one else has been inside it for 10 years.
Ben walked away to continue his work. Mary bent down and began talking to the robin. She felt happier than she had ever felt. The robin trusted her and did not fly away. It began pecking at the ground, looking for a worm to eat. Mary looked closely at the ground. She saw something that looked like metal. She picked it up. It was dirty and rusty. She cleaned it and saw that it was a key.
It's been in the ground for many years.
She thought.
I wonder if it is the key to the garden. If it is, then I must find the door.
Mary skipped around the garden. The robin followed her. Mary stopped skipping and spoke to the robin.
He showed me where to find the key.
She thought.
Can you show me where the door is?
The robin sat on the top of the garden wall. It began to sing. The wall was covered with ivy. Mary pulled at a piece of the ivy. It came away from the wall. Behind the wall was a door. Mary put the key in the lock of the door and turned it. The door opened. Only seconds later, Mary was inside the secret garden. Mary thought it was the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. There were rose trees everywhere, but there were also many weeds. There were also some dead plants that needed to be dug up and some roots that looked like onions.
Nothing seems to move in the garden.
Mary thought.
That's because no one has been inside it for 10 years. I must work here and make it really beautiful. I shall come back this afternoon.
She left the garden and ran back to the house. She ate a big meal. Martha said.
Skipping has made you hungry.
Yes.
Martha said, and then she asked.
Martha, I saw some roots that look like onions. Do you know what they are?
They are bulbs that grow into spring flowers.
Martha said.
Dickon has planted a lot of them in our garden.
She laughed.
He's so clever with plants that he can make flowers grow out of a wall.
Do bulbs last a long time?
Mary asked.
They do. People just leave them in the ground, and every spring, flowers grow from them. There are fields near here that will soon be full of spring flowers.
I wish I had a spade.
Mary said.
This is such a lonely house. No one talks to anyone, except you. You are the only one who talks to me. Ben Weatherstaff is too busy to talk to me. If I had a spade, I could make a little garden. Perhaps he will give me some seeds to plant. How much will a spade cost?
About 2 shillings.
Martha said.
There are spades in a shop in Thwaite.
I've got 2 shillings.
Mary said.
Mrs. Craven has given Mrs. Medlock money to give me. 1 shilling a week.
Then you are rich.
Martha said.
The shop in Thwaite also sells seeds. If you can print a list of what you want, I'll give it to Dickon. I'll go to my room and get a pen and some paper.
Martha went out. She soon came back with a pen and some paper. She wrote to Dickon and told him what Mary wanted.
We'll put the money in the envelope and give it to the butcher. He comes here today. He will take the letter to Dickon.
How will Dickon get the spade and seeds to me?
Mary asked.
He'll give them to you when you see him.
When I see him?
Mary exclaimed.
What do you mean? Will he come here?
Yes, but you may see him at my home first. My mother is going to ask Mrs. Medlock if you can visit.
Do you think she will let me?
Yes, I do.
Martha said.
She likes my mother.
Mary had a thought.
Does the kitchen maid still have a toothache?
She asked Martha.
I thought I heard her crying again at the end of one of the corridors.
You mustn't go walking about the corridors listening for things,
Martha said.
It will make Mr. Craven angry. I need to leave now. Mrs. Medlock wants me.
She ran out of the room. Mary thought Misselthwaite was the strangest house that anyone ever lived in. Then she fell asleep. The skipping had made her tired. Chapter 5. Mary Meets Dickon. Mary spent much of her time in the secret garden, for this is what she called it. She dug up the weeds and made it tidy. She also tried to talk to Ben Weatherstaff. She wanted to ask his advice about what flowers to grow.
If I had a garden,
She said to him one day.
what flowers are the best?
He did not know. She went to the secret garden.
Roses are the best.
He said.
I used to be the gardener to a young lady. She taught me a lot about roses. She loved them. She used to kiss them.
Where is she now?
Mary asked him.
She died
He said.
10 years ago.
He walked away. Mary did not follow him. She knew that he did not want to talk any more that day. On the other side of the garden was a wooded area. Mary skipped toward it. To her surprise, there was a boy sitting under one of the trees. He was playing a tune on a wooden pipe. He was about 12 years of age, and he had bright blue eyes and a red face. 2 rabbits, a squirrel, and a large bird seemed to be listening to him play. As soon as he saw Mary, he said,
Don't come any nearer. You'll frighten away the animals.
He played for a little longer, then slowly stood up. The animals ran away. He came toward Mary.
I'm Dickon,
He said.
and I know who you are. You're Mary.
Did you get Martha's letter?
Mary asked.
I did, and that's why I'm here.
He picked up a large package on the ground.
I got you the gardening tools and some seeds.
Mary sat down on an old log.
Show me the seeds.
She said.
We can look at them together.
They talked about the seeds for a while. Then they heard a bird singing. Dickon asked.
Where's that robin that's calling us?
Is it really calling us?
Mary asked.
Yes, he's calling someone he's friends with.
He's friends with Ben Weatherstaff,
Mary said.
but he also knows me.
Dickon made a sound like the robin's song. The robin answered him. It flew toward them and sat on a bush.
He wouldn't come anywhere near us if he didn't like you.
Dickon said.
Do you really understand what the bird is saying?
Mary asked him.
I think I do.
Dickon answered. Then he picked up one of the packets of seeds and asked.
Shall I help you plant them in your garden?
Mary did not say anything. Dickon asked.
Haven't they given you a piece of garden?
No.
Mary said. She wanted to tell him about the secret garden, but she did not know if she could trust him. She said.
Can you keep a secret?
Of course I can.
Dickon answered.
If I told people about all my animal friends, they would want to see them, and then they would frighten them away.
Mary felt she could trust Dickon. She said.
I've stolen a garden. Only I know how to get into it. No one has cared for it for years. It's full of weeds.
She began to cry.
I have nothing to do and nowhere to go. No one is interested in me. I've only got the secret garden.
Where is it?
Dickon said softly.
Come with me. I'll show you.
Mary stood up and walked to where the door was hidden. Dickon followed her. She opened the door and walked in. Dickon was just behind her.
It's a dead garden,
she said.
I'm the only person in the world who wants to bring it alive.
Dickon looked around.
It's a strange place,
he said.
but it's pretty. It's almost like a garden in a dream.
Then he added,
I never thought I'd see this place.
Do you know about it?
Mary asked him.
Martha told me about a garden that no one ever goes into. This must be it.
He put his fingers to his mouth.
But speak quietly. We don't want anyone to hear us in here.
He began to walk around the garden, looking at all the plants.
There's a lot of work to do here,
he said.
We need to take out all the weeds, cut away the dead plants and dead wood in the bushes. The roses need a lot of care.
They came to a space.
Someone's been working here,
Dickon said.
I have.
Mary told him.
I planted some spring bulbs.
She turned toward him.
Dickon, will you come here and help me make the garden beautiful again?
I will,
he said.
But we won't make it too tidy. I don't want the garden to look like every other garden.
We'll plant all kinds of things,
he said. He looked around.
But those old roses look like someone was here 10 years ago and never came back.
Just then Mary heard a clock strike 12.
I must go.
She said.
If I don't go in for lunch, someone will come looking for me.
You go,
Dickon said.
I've brought my lunch with me, and a little bit more for the birds.
Promise you won't tell anyone about this place?
Mary pleaded.
I promise.
Dickon said.
Your secret is safe with me.
And Mary was sure that it was. Chapter 6. Mary discovers Colin. Mary ran back to the house as fast as she could. Martha was waiting for her.
You're late for lunch,
she said.
I met Dickon.
Mary said excitedly.
I knew he would come.
Martha said.
Do you like him?
I think he's wonderful.
Mary said. She laughed.
And I love his face, even though his nose turns up.
Did he bring the seeds and tools?
Martha asked.
Oh, yes.
Where will you plant the seeds?
Mary did not want to tell Martha about the secret garden. She said.
I don't know yet.
Ask Ben Weatherstaff.
Martha said.
He'll find you a corner of the garden.
Mary began to eat, and when she finished, Martha said,
Mr. Craven came back this morning. He wants to see you.
Why didn't he want to see me when I came here?
Mary wanted to know. Martha replied,
I don't know, but I think my mother said something to him about you. She met him in the village.
Will he stay long this time?
Mary asked.
No,
Martha said.
He's going away again tomorrow. He'll be away for a long time.
Mary was pleased by this news. She wanted time to bring her secret garden back to life. Before Mary could ask Martha more questions, Mrs. Medlock came into the room.
Go to your room and put on a clean dress,
she said.
Brush your hair and then come back down. Mr. Craven wants to see you in his study.
Mary did as she was told. A few minutes later, she was standing in front of Mr. Craven in his study. She saw a man who was not ugly, but who looked very miserable.
Are you well?
He asked.
Yes.
Do they take good care of you?
Yes.
You are very thin.
I'm getting fatter.
I'm sorry,
he said.
I forgot about you. I intended to get you a governess or a nurse.
Mary did not want any such person in her life.
Please don't get anyone,
she said.
I don't need them. I'm too old for them now.
Very well. What do you want to do?
I just want to play outside. I feel stronger when I play and the wind comes across the moor.
Where do you play?
Mr. Craven asked.
Everywhere.
Mary said.
I skip and I run. I don't do any harm.
Of course you won't, he said. You may play wherever you want to. Do you want any toys, books, dolls?
Mary shook her head.
No, but I'd like a small piece of a garden.
Then you may have it.
May I have it anywhere that it's not wanted?
Anywhere. Now I must go. Goodbye, Mary. I shall be away until the winter.
Mary left the room. Mrs. Medlock came in. Mr. Craven said to her,
"She needs plenty of exercise. Let her play in the garden as much as she wants to. Let Martha's mother, Mrs. Sowerby, come and see her as often as she wishes. She has had 12 children of her own and understands them."
Very good, sir.
Mrs. Medlock said.
Mrs. Sowerby and I went to school together. She's a good woman.
"Now send Pitcher to me,"
Mr. Craven said. As soon as Mary left Mr. Craven's study, she went to find Martha.
He's a nice man.
She thought.
He says I can have a piece of garden wherever I like. I must go and tell Dickon.
She ran out of the house to the secret garden. Dickon was not there, but there was a piece of paper stuck to a tree. There was writing on it and a drawing of a bird on a nest. The writing said,
I will come back.
She wanted to start work in the garden, but suddenly the rain came. She ran back to the house and to her room. She lay on her bed and listened to the wind and the rain. Then she heard another sound. It was the sound of crying.
I'm going to find out what that noise is,
she decided. She left her room and walked along the corridor. As she did so, the crying became louder. She came to a door and opened it. Inside, lying on a large bed, was a small boy. He was about 10 years old, the same as her. He was crying, and he looked very ill. She walked slowly toward the bed. He looked up at her.
Are you a ghost?
He asked.
No, I'm not. Are you?
Mary asked.
No.
He said.
I'm Colin. Mr. Craven is my father.
Why are you here?
Mary asked him.
I am very ill. My father won't let me leave this room. He won't let anyone except Mrs. Medlock speak to me.
Does your father visit you?
Sometimes, but he doesn't like me. My mother died when I was born. When he sees me, he is unhappy.
Mary thought.
And he hates the secret garden for the same reason. It was her garden. It makes him think of her.
Tell me about yourself,
Colin said. Mary told Colin about her life in India. Then she told him about the secret garden.
Your father locked the door when your mother died. I don't know who has a key,
she said.
I must see this garden.
Colin said.
I will tell the servants to find the key. They have to obey me. If I live, this place will be mine one day.
Mary was very worried. She did not want the servants to find the door and the key to the secret garden. She said,
Perhaps I can find a way into the garden. You have a wheelchair here. Perhaps the doctor will let me push you outside. I will take you to the garden.
I want to do that.
Colin said.
There's nothing to see in this room. I want to see birds and flowers.
The boy closed his eyes. Mary saw that he was very tired.
I should leave you now,
she said.
But I want to visit you again.
Tell Martha.
Colin said.
She knows about me. When my nurse has to go away for a day, Martha looks after me.
Mary sat by his bed for a moment and stroked his hand. She sang an Indian song to him very softly. Soon he was in a deep sleep. Chapter 7. Mary and Colin become friends. The next day, Mary said to Martha,
I've met Colin. We talked for a long time.
Martha was frightened.
How did you meet him?
I heard crying.
Mary said.
I walked nearer and nearer to the sound. I opened a door into a bedroom. Colin was in there. He was in the bed.
Mrs. Medlock will be very angry.
Martha said.
She'll blame me. I'll lose my job. No one is allowed in that room.
Colin wants to see me often. He will tell you when he wants to see me.
Mary said.
But what will Mrs. Medlock say?
Martha demanded.
And if Mr. Craven finds out?
Mary said.
Colin told me that Mrs. Medlock must obey him. Everyone here must obey him.
She thought about a young prince, a Raja in India. Everyone was his slave. They had to do what he asked. Colin was like this, and yet he was so ill.
What is wrong with him?
She asked Martha.
What is his illness?
No one really knows, but Mr. Craven is worried about his back. As you know, Mr. Craven has a bent back, and he is almost a hunchback. He is worried that Colin will have the same problem. For many years, the doctor made him wear an iron support on his back. He always looks pale and ill.
I'm not surprised.
Mary said.
He never goes out. He never sees anyone except servants. He does nothing all day except lie in bed.
It's very sad.
Martha said.
And his illness has made him very bad-tempered. He always shouts at everyone. He's not a nice boy.
I think he's a very nice boy.
Mary said.
I'm going to his room again.
No, you mustn't.
Martha said.
If Mrs. Medlock finds out, she'll be very angry. I told you I'll lose my job.
No, you won't.
Mary said.
Colin won't let Mrs. Medlock fire you. She does what he tells her to do.
Mary went to Colin's room. He was very pleased to see her. They talked for hours. She told him all about the moor and about Dickon, and how he was so good with animals. She told him about Ben Weatherstaff and the robin. She told him about her life in India.
I feel so much better after talking to you,
Colin said.
You'll feel even better if you can come outside for a short time every day.
I mustn't do that.
Colin said.
I might die.
Why?
I heard the doctor whisper to Mrs. Medlock. He said that I must rest all the time or I'll die.
The two children were silent for a moment, and then Colin said,
I think the doctor likes it when I'm really ill. He always seems to be happy then. I sometimes think my father wants me to die too.
That's nonsense.
Mary said.
Why would he want that?
Because my mother died just after I was born. My father thinks I was to blame for her death.
Mary was quite angry when she heard this.
How can a baby be to blame for anything?
She demanded.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Colin said.
I had another doctor for a time. He came from London. He made them take the iron support off my back. I heard him say, the boy will live if he wants to. It's up to him.
Dickon will make you want to live.
Mary said.
He's always happy, and he has a wonderful life in the woods and on the moor with all the animals and plants.
Dr. Craven will never let me leave this room.
Colin said.
Dr. Craven?
Mary said, the name in surprise.
But that's your family name.
Yes, he's my father's cousin.
At this moment, the door opened, and Mrs. Medlock came in, followed by the doctor.
What's the meaning of this?
Mrs. Medlock shouted.
What are you doing in here? I'm visiting Colin,
Mary said quietly.
We have become friends.
Dr. Craven hurried to the bed. He examined Colin.
The boy is too excited,
He said.
He must rest. You must leave him.
No,
Colin said.
I shall be more excited if Mary leaves. I want her here. She is my friend. I've been feeling better since I met her yesterday.
Mrs. Medlock said.
He does look better, Doctor.
Dr. Craven did not look pleased. He said,
You must not forget how quickly and easily you get tired.
You must remember that if you do not take my advice, you will die.
And with these words he left the room.
He's always telling me that.
Colin said.
I'm sure he really wants me to die.
He turned to Mrs. Medlock.
I want my tea, and bring something for Mary. I'll eat whatever she likes to eat.
Mrs. Medlock went out. Colin said,
Tell me more about the Rajah, Mary.
Chapter 8. Mary quarrels with Colin. It rained for a week, and Mary could not leave the house. She was not unhappy, however, because she had Colin to talk to. They became very good friends, and he seemed to be getting stronger. He was much happier.
He was not a nice child.
Mrs. Medlock told Mary one day.
He was often very rude to me and to his nurse. She wanted to leave because he was so rude to her. He was rude because he felt ill and was unhappy.
Mary said.
He wants to die, Mary.
Mrs. Medlock said.
He's worried that as he grows older, his back will become more bent. He hates people looking at him. One day we took him to the seaside in his big wheelchair. A woman came up and looked at him and said, "Oh, the poor child." She put out her hand to touch him, and he bit it. He really hates being looked at. He doesn't mind me looking at him.
Mary said.
I know. You are very good for him. He's been much better behaved since you became his friend.
As soon as the rain stopped, Mary left the house and ran to the secret garden.
I do hope Dickon will come,
She thought. When she came to the garden, she was surprised to see Dickon already there.
You're here early,
She said.
I've been here since before the sun came up.
He said.
Dawn is the best time of the day.
He was holding a young fox cub. The robin was sitting on a nearby bush. Everywhere, spring flowers were beginning to open.
It's so beautiful here,
Mary said.
But there's a lot of work to do. The rain has made all the weeds grow.
As she and Dickon worked in the garden, she wondered if she should tell him about Colin. She didn't have to decide. He already knew.
You've made friends with Colin,
He said.
Martha told Mother, and she told me.
Why didn't you tell me about him?
Mary asked.
Why did you keep him a secret from me?
You asked me if I can keep a secret.
Dickon said.
Well, Colin was a secret. No one ever talks about him. If I must keep one secret, I must keep another.
Mary knew this was right. She said,
I'd like to bring him here. I think he'll keep the place a secret. This garden would be so good for him.
Mary and Dickon worked all day in the garden. She was so happy and busy that she forgot all about Colin. When she got back to the house, Martha asked,
Where have you been? Colin's been asking for you.
I've been busy.
Mary said.
I'll go and see him now.
He's in a very bad mood.
Martha said.
He's been shouting at everyone all day. You must never keep him waiting like this again.
Mary went to Colin's room. As she entered, he shouted at her.
I've been waiting for you all day.
I'm sorry, Colin, but I've been busy.
You must never be too busy to see me. When I want you here, you must come immediately.
Nonsense.
Mary said.
I've been working in the garden with Dickon.
I'll tell Mrs. Medlock to send Dickon away.
Colin said.
If you do, I'll never come to this room again.
Mary replied.
You'll come when I tell you to.
Colin demanded.
I will not.
They will pull you in.
If they do, I shall just look at the floor, and I shall not speak a word.
Mary was really angry, but unlike Colin, she did not speak loudly.
You're selfish,
Colin told her.
You think only of yourself.
What about you?
Mary demanded.
You're like all selfish people. You say other people are being selfish.
Dickon's the most selfish boy in the world.
Colin said.
He makes you work in the garden when you should be here with me.
Dickon is the nicest boy who ever lived.
Mary replied.
He's an angel.
He's a poor servant's son.
Colin said.
And I'm not as selfish as you. I'm ill, and my back is getting worse. And I'm going to die soon.
I don't believe you.
Mary said.
You say that to make people feel sorry for you. I think you're proud of your back and your silly illness.
Get out of this room!
Colin shouted. He was so angry with Mary now that he began to cry.
Very well, I will go.
Mary said.
And I shall never come back. I was going to tell you all kinds of interesting things. Dickon has a fox cub and a robin. But now I'll never tell you anything again.
She turned and walked out of the room. As she did so, she passed the new nurse. She was a young woman who was not a real nurse at all. She was laughing at the quarrel between the two children.
Is he going to die?
Mary asked her.
I don't know if he will, but if he does, it will be his bad temper that kills him, not his illness.
When Mary got back to her room, there was a large wooden box on the table. Martha was taking the lid off the box.
Mr. Craven sent this to you,
she said. She looked into the box. It was full of books and other things. There were picture books of gardens, and there was a writing case with a pen, paper, and ink. There were also some games.
I will write immediately to Mr. Craven and thank him,
she said. Then Mary thought about Colin. She was sad that she could not go to him and tell him about all her presents and share them with him.
I don't want him to think about his back or about dying.
She thought.
I want him to get better.
She decided to go back in the morning.
Perhaps then
She thought.
he'll want to see me.
Chapter 9. Mary helps Colin to get better. That same evening, Mrs. Medlock came to Mary's room.
The boy is hysterical.
She said,
He's screaming and hitting the bed. He'll hurt himself. The nurse and I can't do anything with him. You must come, Mary. You're the only person he will listen to.
Mary guessed why Colin was behaving badly. It was because of their quarrel.
I'll come,
She said.
but I don't know if he'll listen to me.
When she entered Colin's room, he screamed at her.
Go away! I hate you! I hate you! I'm dying. There is a lump in my back. I can feel it.
Oh, be quiet.
Mary said.
There's nothing wrong with your back. There's nothing wrong with you. It's all in your imagination.
It's not. It's not. There's a lump in my back.
You're just a nasty, bad-tempered boy. And when you can't have your own way, you pretend that you're dying. Well, I don't believe you.
I can prove it.
Colin screamed.
Feel my back.
He lay on his stomach and pulled up his pajama top.
Now feel it. You can see the lump. It's getting bigger and bigger.
Mary felt Colin's back. There was no lump. His back was as smooth as hers.
There is no lump, Colin.
She said.
Believe me, there's nothing wrong with your back.
You're lying.
Mary turned to the nurse.
Feel his back, nurse. Tell me if you can feel a lump.
The nurse felt Colin's back.
It's a lovely back.
She said.
Really smooth.
Mary said.
I want to be alone with Colin. Please leave us.
The nurse and Mrs. Medlock left the room. Colin lay back in the bed. He was very tired from all his screaming and shouting.
Now listen to me.
Mary said.
Your problem is that you do not get any exercise. And because you don't get any exercise, you are never hungry, so you don't eat enough. If you will change your ways, you will soon be big and strong. I want to bring Dickon to meet you. May I do that?
It won't do any good.
Colin said.
I know I'm going to die soon. The doctor is always telling me that if I don't rest, I'll die.
I think you'll die if you don't get out of this room.
Mary said.
May I bring Dickon or not?
Yes, all right.
Colin was tired and he slept. The next morning, Mary brought Dickon to see Colin. Dickon brought a fox cub and a baby bird with him. Colin loved looking at them and hearing Dickon talk about them. Dickon said,
You need to get out of here and do some exercises. Get into your wheelchair and I'll push you into the garden. I must ask Dr. Craven if I can leave the room.
Colin said. When Dr. Craven arrived, Colin told him what he wanted to do. At first, he was against the idea, but Mrs. Medlock said,
Mary is the only one who can help Colin, Doctor, and Dickon is a good, sensible boy. I don't think Colin will get hurt.
Dr. Craven agreed, but told Colin not to get too tired. Every day, Dickon came to the house and pushed Colin to the secret garden. Mary was always with them.
There's only one way to get strong, Colin,
Dickon said.
You must do exercises and eat good food. My mother is a fine cook. I'll bring you food every day, and I'll teach you some simple exercises.
The weeks passed. Mary and Dickon worked in the garden while Colin watched them. Slowly, he got stronger and stronger. After several weeks, he was able to walk. Mrs. Medlock was worried, however. Although Colin was getting fatter, he would not eat the food she put in front of him. She did not know that he was eating the food that Mrs. Sowerby, Dickon's mother, sent to him every day. Dr. Craven was also worried. He could see that Colin was much better. He pretended to be pleased, but he wasn't. Colin said to Mary and Dickon,
I don't think Dr. Craven is pleased that I'm getting better, because if I live, he won't get Misselthwaite when my father dies.
One day, Mrs. Sowerby came to the secret garden.
Your mother will be so pleased,
She said to Colin.
I'm sure her spirit is in this garden, and she knows how well you are doing.
That evening, she wrote to Mr. Craven. She asked him to return home. She told him there was something he needed to see. Mr. Craven knew that Mrs. Sowerby always told the truth. He knew, too, that his wife and Mrs. Sowerby had been good friends. He returned to Misselthwaite. Mrs. Medlock said,
There have been big changes, sir. Master Colin is so different now, and so is Mary. They are both strong, healthy children.
But what about Colin's back and his legs?
Go and see for yourself, sir.
Mrs. Medlock said.
He's in the garden that your wife loved and spent so much time in.
Mr. Craven went quickly to the garden. As he entered it, a tall, healthy boy walked toward him.
Who are you?
He said to the boy.
I'm Colin, Father,
Colin said. He took his father's hand. At first, Mr. Craven could not believe that this strong, happy boy was his son, but at last he did. The two of them walked hand in hand toward the house. For the first time since his wife died, Mr. Craven was smiling. Playlet. The Secret Garden.
Colin, this is Dickon, Martha's brother.
Hello? What are you doing? I'm weeding. Everything is overgrown. Why doesn't Ben Weatherstaff look after the garden?
I told you, Colin, it's a secret garden. I found it by accident. It was your mother's favorite place. When she died, your father locked the door. He never comes here because it makes him unhappy. No one else comes here either.
Why do you come here?
Because it's a secret place. No one comes to find me here.
She's happy here, Colin. What do you know about anything? You're just a servant's son.
That was rude. If you're going to speak to Dickon like that, I shall never bring you here again.
I don't care. My back is going to get bent and have a lump in it. I shall die soon. You won't die if you eat properly and exercise. You feel ill because you stay in bed all the time. You don't use your body.
He's right, Colin. Everyone needs to exercise and eat good food.
I hate the food Mrs. Medlock brings me. It's nothing but thin soup. That's because she thinks you are ill. She thinks you need that kind of food, but you don't. You need the kind of food I eat.
Look how strong and healthy Dickon looks.
I'll bring you some food that my mother cooks. You'll like it, and it will make you strong.
And you must do some exercises, Colin.
It's hard for me to exercise because of my back. What's that animal over there? It's a fox cub. Will it bite? No, it's my pet. It eats from my hand. Do you want to touch it? Can you promise that it won't bite me? It won't bite you if you speak softly to it and are kind with it. I'll hold him while you pet him. Its fur is soft.
Haven't you ever had a pet? A cat or a puppy?
No. Dr. Craven won't let me have one. He says I might get a disease from it, and because I am so weak and ill, the disease would kill me. I think this Dr. Craven, whoever he is, wants to frighten you. He's my father's cousin. When my father dies, I will inherit Misselthwaite.
And what happens if you die before your father?
Then Dr. Craven will inherit Misselthwaite.
Perhaps he wants you to die soon, Colin. Perhaps he's keeping you weak so that you will die soon.
No, there's a lump growing in my back.
Nonsense. Just because your father has a slightly bent back doesn't mean that you will have one. I felt your back. There isn't the smallest lump, and you know it. The lump is in your imagination, and you make a lot of trouble so that you can have your way all the time.
Which is better, Colin? To live in one room, staying in bed all the time, or having the kind of life that Mary and I have?
It's beautiful in this garden, Colin. There are birds and flowers. The air is fresh, and we feel happy all the time.
Your mother loved this garden. I think her spirit will be happy if you spend time in here. I need to be stronger. I'll make you stronger. I'll bring you good food and teach you some exercises.
I don't understand it, sir. Colin won't eat the food I give him, and yet he seems to be getting bigger and stronger every day.
I am very worried about the boy. He spends too much time outside. He should be resting in bed in his room.
He seems to be much happier, sir. And even Mary is looking healthier. And she is much happier. She and Colin are the best of friends.
She had no right to visit him in his room. I told you Colin must not have visitors. He's not strong enough. Why didn't you stop her?
It was too late. She heard him crying and found his room.
Where is he now?
I'm sorry to have to tell you this, sir, but Mary found your wife's garden.
But I locked it. I gave instructions that no one was to go into it.
I'm sorry, sir, but they are quite safe in there. Mrs. Sowerby's son, Dickon, is with them.
I see. Well, she's a sensible woman, and he's a sensible boy. Are they in the garden now?
Yes, sir.
I shall go and see them. Who are you?
Father, I'm Colin, your son.
Nonsense. My son is a weak child who cannot walk and who is very ill.
No, Father, I am Colin. Dickon has taught me to do exercises. Mrs. Sowerby sends me food. Mary has shown me that there is nothing on my back.
I cannot believe this.
It's true.
Mary and the secret garden have cured Colin, sir. He needed only to stop thinking he was ill and to lead a normal life.
Come back to the house with me, my son. We have many things to talk about. And thank you, both of you, for what you have done.
Thank the secret garden. It is the garden and the spirit of the garden that have cured him.